Those Democrats certainly did have themselves a little party, didn't they? They even managed to squeeze a little policy in there occasionally. They brought out all the luminaries, all the dignitaries, all the personalities, all the celebrities. Are the Obamas dignitaries, luminaries, personalities, or celebrities? I guess it doesn't matter. Kamala showed us she has the ability to do what any 17-year-old high school valedictorian can do, read a speech. Welcome to the Comparison Guy podcast. Today is August 28th. Yeah, that's right. I know it's been a while since the last episode. I know. I got a life too, you know. I had some out-of-town guests again. And let me just tell you, my wife's side of the family should write a book on how to be a house guest. I mean, just the nicest, least annoying people ever. They don't bug you for anything. Half the time, I didn't even know where they were. And I'm not talking about they weren't in the house. They were somewhere in the house, but they were so quiet, I didn't even know where they were. Just perfect. Perfect for a house guest. Then I had to go to the wedding I told you about a few months back. You remember. I told you. I told the bride and groom, don't have ugly kids. You remember. It was an excellent wedding. Excellent. If you're getting married, my advice to you, open bar. You got to have an open bar. I don't care if you got to cut cost anywhere else. Serve Hot Pockets for dinner if you have to. Get the wedding dress from Goodwill. Hire the DJ from the DNC. You have to have an open bar. So it was a fantastic wedding. So I'm a little bit late in putting out an episode. I get that. I appreciate your patience. And as a reward for you, I might have a twofer this week. I'm going to do this episode, which I'm going to talk way more about the DNC than I thought I was going to. And then maybe within a couple of days, I'll put out another episode, which is going to be a hard-hitting interview with, once again, my dad. That's right. I'm going to bring my father back in, and I explain to him this time the gloves are off. I'm not going to treat him gentle like last time. I'm not going to prep him with questions. I'm going to bring him in, and I'm going to sit him down, and I am going to straighten him out. So be on the lookout for that. You might want to go subscribe. I've been begging. I've been asking. Do me this one favor. Go and subscribe somewhere. Subscribe to YouTube. Subscribe to Apple. Subscribe to Spotify. Subscribe to all three. And then you'll get a notification when the show is released. When a new episode comes out, you can go listen. All right? Comparison Guy podcast. Now, you listen to me and you listen good. I did not watch but maybe 8 seconds of the DNC. I watched maybe 12 seconds of the RNC. And the only reason I watched that one longer is I was trying to figure out if J.D. Vance's wife was hot. I think she is. So I'm sorry. But I hate wasted time. I can't do it. I hate wasted time. I know I sit here and I say, I give people a hard time when they say they can't watch different forms of media, but this is not that. This is just, it's a total waste of time. I feel like I can give you a pretty good synopsis without even having watched either of the conventions. Here it goes. This is my synopsis. Be afraid. Be very afraid. Can you imagine if this person becomes president, we're all doomed? Then it's a list of grievances, sometimes based on what people are pissed about in the polls. Sometimes it's just same old politics. Oh, the Democrats are commies. MAGA is a cult. Gas prices, food prices, Second Amendment, abortion, tax the rich, the border, and oh yeah, January 6th. That's it. Just a list of grievances. You know the list. And then I'm fighting for you. We're fighting for you. He's fighting for you. She's fighting for you. We're fighting for the middle class. We're fighting for everyday Americans, as opposed to every other day Americans, I guess. I don't know. There's a lot of fighting going on. A lot of fighting for the American people. Well, maybe a little less fighting, a little more winning. And I put that on both the parties. They've been fighting for the American people for the last how many years? And things just don't ever seem to get better. Sometimes they don't even seem to get worse. They just don't get better. Sometimes they just stay the same for hard-working, regular folks like me. It would be one thing if the government was promising to fight for me and things just stayed the same. Then I go, oh, well, okay. But for the past 50 years, it seems like for most people, things have gotten progressively worse for the vast majority of people while the rich get richer. And so, how are you fighting for the middle class? You're fighting for regular people, but consistently, by your own admission, those are the people who are struggling while the rich continue to get richer. When are we going to win one of these fights? If a team gets progressively worse for 50 years, like, say, the Cleveland Browns. Sorry, Ohio. If a team gets progressively worse, you train strategy. Especially if over all those years you keep changing out the players, you keep changing out the head coaches, you keep changing out the general managers, and the team is just getting progressively worse or not winning. Well, you got to go, we need a whole new strategy here. We need to come up with a whole new strategy. Did what was going on at either one of these conventions look like a whole new strategy, or did it look like the same old strategy over and over and over in every single speech? I'm fighting for you. Which was it? Same old strategy. So that's my synopsis of the conventions without even watching them. But let me back up. Because I have to address this Kamala thing, because people are confused by the last couple of recent episodes I've done, which I can understand that. I definitely get that. They think I sound like I'm leaning towards Trump all of a sudden. Let me clarify. I have no idea whether Kamala Harris really thought she could be president in 2020. I have no clue. When she ran in 2020, there were a busload of Democrats throwing their hats in the ring, just like Republicans in 2016. There was just this flood of people deciding that they could run and maybe they could be president. Now, some of them were just dismissed right away, like Trump. he was dismissed right away as just running to get a job on Fox. Or there were some people who they said, oh, they're just looking for a VP nod, or they're just running to get a job in the cabinet of the likely winner. So I don't know if Kamala Harris fell into that category, whether she was trying to put herself in a better position as senator in California. Some people do that. They run, and then it gives them a better track to getting reelected in the job that they're in, governor, senator, whatever. I don't know if she was doing that or if she really believed she could be president or was ready to be president. I don't know if she was setting herself up for a future run in the following election, or she was looking just for to set her up for some future national aspirations. I don't know. But then she got picked to be VP because Joe wanted a black woman. Joe didn't want a white man. Joe did not want a black man. Joe did not even want a white woman. Joe wanted a black woman. Is that DEI? Is that diversity, equity, and inclusion? Heck no. It's something far worse. It's politics. It's politics. Kamala Harris was not a DEI pick. She was a political pick. For anyone saying Kamala Harris was a DEI pick, I have to ask you, are you saying she got picked because she's a black woman but was not qualified for the job? That's not DEI. That is not DEI. You're confused over what DEI is. DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, is a very judicious process by which you say, we have several well-qualified potential candidates here. They all meet or exceed our desires for the position. So let's look at other variables to see what positive perspectives each might bring to the table. A woman. A black man. An Asian woman. These people have backgrounds and experiences that might be more beneficial than someone who doesn't have those same background or experiences but is well qualified too. That's DEI. I need a black woman on a ticket to help me in Detroit, Philadelphia, Milwaukee. That's politics. That's politics. I need a black woman, whether she's qualified or not, to help me get elected. That's politics. That is not DEI. So she was a political pick whose initial intentions are unclear to me, And then she falls just backwards into a presidential nomination without a primary because the exact same imbeciles that managed to have Joe Biden trailing Donald Trump 4 months from the election decided Joe's out, she's in. The same dimwits that can't figure out how to beat a guy that we cannot say with 100% of certainty is not just a figment of our imagination, Donald Trump. The same people who can't figure out how to beat him now want to run her campaign and tell us she's the best person for the country. And for one reason only, I don't care what anyone else tells me, she was the only person who could access all the millions of campaign dollars they raised. Replace Joe with anyone else, and legally, they could not access that money. So what you're hearing is not me all of a sudden moving more towards Donald Trump. It's just my displeasure with Kamala Harris. That's all. I'm pissed. We've been put in this position by a group of idiots. By a group of idiots that can't figure out how to win an election against Dementis from Furiosa. I'm shaken up. I'm worried. I'm frustrated. Above all, I'm frustrated. It's like switching from Pat Sajak to Ryan Seacrest. Sajak was fine. Not the best ever. But you think I'm going to get excited about Ryan Seacrest? I'm frustrated because all I ever hear from people is, I'm so sick of the status quo. I'm just sick of the status quo. You can't get more status quo than that DNC. You can't get more status quo than Kamala Harris. What made it not status quo? The DJ? When the states went around and said who they're nominating, did that make it not status quo? Lil Jon, what made it not status quo? You want to hear non-status quo? Go listen to my episode, Me versus Biden versus Trump. You want to hear not status quo? I did that episode kind of tongue-in-cheek, and I still gave more concrete and realistic out-of-the-box policy solution with detail than either candidate running for president right now. I kid you not. I actually did an episode where I gave more specific detail on what I would do as president than the people we have running for president. And you know what the answer, what some Democrats' answers to the no specifics from Kamala on policy, you know what the answer is? There's two. One, we don't need specifics. We trust her. Democrats can trust their candidates. They know what they're going to do when they get elected to office. Okay. If she says she'll lower food prices, we don't need specifics on how. We trust her. And two, well, what about Trump's specifics? What about Trump's specifics on policy? Trump isn't giving any policy. He's not giving policy, much less specifics. Why don't you ask him? Well, now that's very frustrating. Someone's going to have to explain this to me. Why is it when I draw comparisons or point out that at times both the sides, both Democrats and Republicans do similar things, why is it I get accused of a false equivalency? Why is it when I try and give examples from both perspectives, look at things in a fair way, I'm accused of a false equivalency? But when somebody else says, well, what about when they did it? Well, what about when they did it? How come that's not a false equivalency? How come that's okay? Example, if I say, man, the Democrats have really blown up the deficit. We're going to be running a $2 trillion deficit this year. People say, oh, what about Trump? How come you didn't say anything when Trump was blowing up the deficit with those Trump tax cuts? Okay. But if somebody says to me, Donald Trump blew up the deficit with Trump tax cuts, and I say, well, the Democrats sure are spending a whole lot too, a false equivalency. You see there? That's a false equivalency. Well, it sounds like we're saying the same thing, no? How come it's okay when you do it, but it's not okay when I do it? It's a whole different thing. I don't get it. I don't understand that. Fox News should be ashamed of themselves. They should be ashamed of the lies that they spew on that network. Well, MSNBC, they're not very honest a lot of times, too. Here, let me give you some examples. False equivalency. Man, Morning Joe on MSNBC and Rachel Maddow and Joanne Reed and Alice Wagner, they're really biased. Oh, yeah, well, what about Fox and Friends and Sean Hannity and blah, blah. Huh? How is the whataboutism different than the false equivalency? These election deniers belong in jail. Didn't people deny that Trump was legitimately elected because of Russian false equivalency? False equivalency, straw man argument, gaslighting. You're gaslighting me. People don't have an answer, so they just come up with one of these new terms they've learned. It's frustrating. It's very frustrating. How can you have a discussion with people like that? If they're going to do the exact same thing that you do, say the exact same thing you say, but they'll excuse themselves because they'll use the term false equivalency or straw man argument or gaslighting or whatever. It's very frustrating. Let me try and help out. Let me see if this will help in the conversation going forward we're going to have for the rest of this episode. This is an example of a false equivalency. Listen to this. Is this chair making noise? I feel like every time I switch chairs, I feel like every time I move, this chair makes noise. I'm going to switch back. Hang on. All right. Oh, that's better. All right. Hopefully this one won't make too much noise. All right. Listen to this.
Kamala Harris.
Kamala. You said it. We don't call you Nancy. It's Kamala. You're doing this on purpose, Congresswoman.
That's disrespectful.
You can't expect people to respect your service if you don't respect
and walked
hers.
that stage 25 years ago.
You're a white woman disrespecting a black woman.
That achievement away from women.
That's
Let me get in here.
So that's a bunch of people straight up losing their minds over a woman mispronouncing Kamala Harris's name on CNN. Now listen to this.
But it was there that I saw Trump love to fan racial flames. On the other side is a woman that I've walked with in Selma, Alabama to commemorate the 59th anniversary of Bloody Sunday. Kamala Harris spoke to me that day about unity and passing.
Kamala Harris. Kamala is Kamala. So that's Reverend Al Sharpton at the DNC mispronouncing Kamala Harris's name. Now, you see, that would be a false equivalency. If I came on here and I said to you, see, it's not racist. It's not racist. It's not being done on purpose. Of course it is. Of course it's being done on purpose to upset people, to provoke people. But that's not what Al Sharpton did. Al Sharpton made a mistake. So if I tried to say different, that would be a false equivalency. That would. It's not a false equivalency for me to say we have a liberal media and a conservative media. It's not a false equivalency for me to point out the similarities, some negative similarities of both parties, of both liberal and conservative media, the inconsistencies of both, the hypocrisy of both, the double standards of both. It's not a false equivalency. It's legitimate observations in the name of being honest, fair, and consistent. Stop excusing your side's behavior by calling everything a false equivalency. Now that I've said that, maybe we can get through some real discussion. We cannot ignore the shortcomings of Kamala Harris. We can't. We can't just go along with people who want to act as if Kamala Harris's unlikely journey is great for the country. We cannot Ozempic this country. Kamala Harris does not have a magic injection to give this country to make everything great. The government can't solve our problems. When we insist on acting as if some person we elect or the government can solve all of our problems, we end up here. Listen to this.
This inflation is up. Your signature domestic legislation is stalled in Congress. In a few hours from now, the Senate, an effort in the Senate to deal with voting rights and voting reform legislation is going to fail. COVID-19 is still taking the lives of 1,500 Americans every day, and the nation's divisions are just as raw as they were a year ago. Did you overpromise to the American public what you could achieve in your first year in office, and how do you plan to course correct going forward?
Look, I didn't overpromise, but I have probably outperformed what anybody thought would happen. I did not anticipate that there'd be such a stalwart effort to make sure that the most important thing was that President Biden didn't get anything done. Think about this. What are Republicans for? What are they for?
That is from a press conference Joe Biden had back in January of 2022. I played clips from it and talked about it on my episode back then, my grade on Biden's first year. That was the episode. I talked about it back then, about Joe Biden overpromising. When I talked about it, I screamed about how I've been saying for a year, this is Democrats' problem. They insist on overpromising what government can do. This is 3 years ago. I'm screaming about this. And I'm not the only one, I know. Trust me, I realize, again, I'm not the only one saying this stuff. This is not unique ideas. I get that. But it's frustrating. It's out there. It's out there for everyone to see, for everyone to hear. Joe Biden had a problem back in January of 2022 when his polls were in the toilet, when things were looking grim going into the midterms because the Democrats had overpromised. Later on in that same press conference, I played the clip, a reporter asked him, Mr. President, do you think the problem is you're trying to do too much? Do you think you should shrink this huge, big, whatever it was at the time, Build Back Better, Inflation Reduction Act? What was the other thing they were calling it? Was it a template? Not a template. Doggone it. What was the term they were using for it for a minute there? I think it was a framework. It was the Build Back Better framework. It was an agenda. The Build Back Better agenda. It was 97 different things. Inflation Reduction Act. They asked him, Joe, do you think you're trying to do too much? This is too big, this big reconciliation bill. Do you think it should break it down in smaller parts? And he says, no. And then 2 minutes later, he says, maybe we should break this down into smaller parts and get done with the most popular parts of it. They're doing the same thing now. Kamala Harris is essentially doing the same thing now. This big, huge agenda that can never get done in its current form. Never. I don't care what the breakdown of Congress is. Never get done. Never deliver on what she's promising. The same way Biden couldn't. The same exact way Biden couldn't. You tell me I'm crazy. You go listen to her DNC speech. Go listen to her speech on her economic plan. And you tell me, does it sound like she's overpromising? You tell me if it sounds like she thinks she can Ozempic this country. She's going to inject us with a shot of joy and just baller black girl magic, and everybody in the middle class is going to have health care and child care and a tax cut, a good paying union job, safe streets with no crime, and all the Philly cheesesteaks you can eat. Oh, it's going to be awesome. It's going to be awesome. Is she overpromising? Joe did. And did you hear the most astonishing, unthinkable, preposterous part of that clip? Did you hear it? Play it one more time.
I did not anticipate that there'd be such a stalwart effort to make sure that the most important thing was that President Biden didn't get anything done.
What in the flim flam frickety frack, excuse my language, did he just say? What did he actually say? I didn't know Republicans were going to stop me from doing anything. Did he seriously say that 3 years ago? Where had he been? Raise your hand if you think Republicans will be anxious to work with President Kamala to advance her agenda for the good of the American people. Raise your hand. And once again, keep your hand up if you think that, so I can come to your house and sterilize you, because we cannot have your level of stupidity breeding. Who doesn't know Republicans are not going to work with the Democratic president? Who doesn't know that at this point? And if you say, oh, well, no, Joe got a lot of things done on bipartisan. Well, okay, yeah, well, a couple of Republicans. Sure, a couple of Republicans on a couple of things, like infrastructure, like a gun bill that doesn't go far enough, but okay, like the CHIPS Act. Okay, sure, but not on universal health care, not on raising taxes, not on expanding the child care tax credit or bringing back the child care tax credit, not on going after big pharma, not on more gun reform. In other words, not on the entire Democratic platform. They're not going to work with her. No, Kamala Harris will not be able to do all she is promising if for no other reason she won't have the numbers in Congress to do all she is promising. The biggest thing she's promising. This is no different than Republicans lying to voters and saying, we're going to repeal Obamacare. Give us the House, give us the Senate, and we're going to repeal Obamacare, knowing it was impossible when Barack Obama was president because Barack Obama was never going to sign legislation to repeal his own bill. This is the same thing. They're essentially lying to voters. Republicans knew they could never realistically repeal Obamacare, and Democrats should know they will never be able to realistically do all the things they're promising because they're not going to have the numbers in Congress to do it. And it may not just be Republicans that stop them. It might be people from their own party, just like Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema stopped Biden from some of his agenda until his agenda got more moderate, until it was things that people could agree on, like infrastructure, like the CHIPS Act. This is not hard. I've been screaming about it for 3 years, and nobody wanted to listen to me. Nobody wanted to listen to me. And now all of a sudden you got all these people running around going, Kamala's moving to the center. Kamala's moving toward the center. The center! The center! People called you an idiot if you told Democrats to move to the center, if you said they were moving too far left. I played you the clip. The clip, I think that guy has a TV show on MSNBC now. The guy I played you the clip of so long ago that said there is no center. Said the center doesn't even exist anymore. Don't bother. Everyone leans left or right. I played you that clip on more than one occasion. And now everybody said, Kamala's moving towards the center. Wouldn't it be easier to already be there? If you stay ready, you ain't got to get ready. Wouldn't it be better if they were in the center all this time? Wouldn't the people who are supporting Kamala and so excited about Kamala and so joyful for Kamala, wouldn't they still be there? But you would have picked up millions of other voters along the way, so you wouldn't have to be trying to get there. You'd already be there. Wouldn't that have been so much easier? I spent 3 years here saying it. 3 years. Saying what everyone at that doggone rootin' tootin' stinking Democratic convention is now saying. Everything they're now saying. Barack Obama, I swear, probably had an earpiece in his ear playing my show while he was giving his speech. Took everything right from this podcast, that doggone Barack Obama. He's memorized every episode, and he went right up there and he gave a speech, taken straight from this podcast. Meanwhile, I got 2 listeners, thank you very much, by the way, and the people who want to sit there and tell you, revising the jobs down by 800,000 something ain't that big a deal. The people who want to tell you that got millions. Millions. It's not a big deal. 800,000 less jobs than we thought in a year. That's not a big deal. So you're telling me that instead of creating, let's say, 220,000 jobs a month, we only created 140,000 jobs a month? You're telling me that ain't a big deal? Well, no, because there's still 160 million people working, and if you tell me it's just 159.2 million, these are educated people. These are smart, educated people saying this. No big deal. 159.2 instead of 160. No big deal. It's not the overall job market. It's the jobs in the past 12 months. Don't you get it? Don't you understand? It's an indication that job growth may be slowing. The labor market may be loosening up somewhat. Businesses may be tightening up their hiring a bit. It's important to know that information because it matters so much in so many decisions that the Fed makes. So it's an incredibly big deal to get those numbers accurate. How can you have a single listener telling people that's not a big deal? How is that possible? Oh, it's possible. It's possible. And because it is possible, we're facing a choice between crazy and stupid. Crazy and stupid. We put ourselves in this position. And there are people acting like I'm supposed to celebrate that choice and be joyful about being put in a position on November 5th to choose between crazy and stupid. Let me try and explain. Let me try and explain it once again. And this time, I'm going to give you more than just my words. I'll give you the words from people who are far more influential than me, and I'm going to give you proof of what I'm saying. What? Proof? I'm going to give you proof of what I'm saying. And by the way, the crazy, I don't have to get into that, do I? You you see the crazy, right? I don't have to get into that. I've gotten into that in many episodes. So the crazy we get, it's the stupid that I think people aren't wrapping their heads around. Yes, I know I always say it's not good to call people stupid. It derails the conversation. But for lack of a better word, I'm going with it. The stupid. The foundation, the very foundation of the Democrats' whole platform, their whole raison d'etre is growing the economy from the bottom up and the middle out, making big corporations and the wealthy pay their fair share. That's it. That's the basics of their whole existence. You can get into the specifics, lowering the cost of prescription drugs, child care tax credit, paid family leave, lowering the cost of gas and groceries. We're going to lower the cost of housing. We're going to make college education more accessible. We're going to protect Social Security and Medicare. All the wonderful things government can do for you if only the rich would pay their fair share. If only these doggone rootin' tootin', excuse my language, corporations and the wealthy would pay their fair share. Now, I've said it a million times, but maybe hearing someone else say it will help.
Folks, everything they're telling you is bullshit. Everything. They are not going to cut middle-class taxes. They're going to hike them. What the hell do you think the corporate tax is? The tax on business. Really dumb. Where do businesses get their money from? Customers? So if the business has to pay more in taxes and has to meet a threshold to stay in business, where are they going to get the more money to pay the elevated tax rates? From the customers. Why are you so freaking stupid, liberals?
Sorry. I've tried to explain it nicely as I can, for 3 years now. Let Dan Bongino explain it to you. Prefer him to explain it to you that way? Where do corporations get their money from? From customers. If their cost goes up, be it taxes, be it labor, be it energy, be it regulations, I don't care if they get fined $1 billion for dumping poison in a lake. Their cost gets passed on to the consumer. Why? Because they can. Because they can. You call it whatever you want. You want to call it greed, call it greed. They call it a free market economy. They'll charge whatever you're willing to pay. The more money you got to spend, the more they will charge. It's basic economics. We pay the tax. They don't. Prices go up. And then what do you have? What do you risk? Wage price spiral. Remember when I told you about that? Okay, well, maybe you need to hear it from someone else. Listen.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's more indicative of a tight labor market. And so you've seen wages run pretty hot, at least above where the Fed wants them to run. And the UAW strike is indicative that employees have some kind of bargaining power over employers, which typically happens at the end of every economic cycle. And that's what causes wages to rise. And I think people need to remember the period of time in this country in which inflation ran hot, 1966 to 1982, was called a wage price spiral, where wages kept going higher and pulling inflation back up. And to me, that's what the Fed is worried about. That typically happens at the end of every economic cycle, and that's where you're at today. And that's why I still see the Fed continuing to fight inflation until wages push lower. And unfortunately, the only way that has occurred in the past is through a recession. And I don't think this time will be any different.
Maybe I could have found a better clip than that. I just wanted you to hear someone else talking about wage price spiral other than me just telling you it. I wanted you to hear some economic nerd talk about it, because there are plenty of economic nerds out there talking about it. They've been talking about it for a long time now, for a few years now. Have you heard it? Other than here, if you heard it here? No. No, but it's one of the Fed's greatest concerns. It's one of Jerome Powell's greatest concerns. Wage price spiral. How is it possible that's not talked about when inflation is talked about? How is that possible? Maybe because it's reality, not politics. It's not fun. It's not glamorous. I get that. But it's reality. It's not spin. Wage price spiral leads to inflation. Higher prices demands higher wages. You have more to spend, so you get higher prices, which demands higher wages. Coming out of a pandemic, leverage is on the side of workers to demand higher wages. Labor cost goes up, so you get higher prices, which then demands higher wages. Throw in government intervention with child care tax credits, student loan debt cancellation, expanding SNAP benefits at the state and federal levels, a tight labor market combined with more disposable income, you have higher spending, higher wages, leading to higher prices. Higher prices leads to corporate record profits. Have we lost our ever-loving minds? It's basic economics. It's all out there for anyone who wants to listen. It's all out there. Wage price spiral. I've talked about it on this show. But don't argue with me. Argue with the 50 gazillion Poindexter economists out there who know we went through this from the 60s to the 80s. You heard them. We've gone through this before. It led to stagnant inflation. We should have learned our lesson back then. Well, you just wait a minute. You just wait. You just hold on 1 second there, comparison guy. What about this?
Is it possible that this administration should take some blame for the double-digit run-up in food prices alone? Any blame at all? Do you accept any blame? Should she accept any blame for that?
No, I think overwhelmingly what people are seeing is that the United States got through the recovery with greater jobs, greater growth. The global inflation that you talk about happened everywhere in the world.
Woe is me. That's some Harris campaign advisor or a spokesperson on Fox News answering the question, should the Biden-Harris administration take any blame for the inflation? Any blame? The answer? No. No. Our economy is the best, and inflation is global, not just here. There's inflation all over the world, so you can't blame the Biden-Harris administration for inflation. From IMF Media, June 27th of this year. The U.S. economy is performing well, but the government should look for ways to strengthen its fiscal position in the medium term by reducing spending and raising revenue. From Bloomberg, April 16th of this year. IMF steps up its warning to U.S. over ballooning debt. From Reuters, an article. After applauding the U.S. for strong economy and actions to bring down inflation, quote, the IMF chided Washington for rising deficits that, if continued, would bring U.S. debt to GDP ratio to a concerning level of 140% by the end of the decade. Such high deficits and debt create a growing risk to the U.S. and global economy. Axios from April 19th. Headline, behind the IMF's warning to Biden and Congress on deficit spending. CNN from April 17th. America's debt problem is stirring up trouble for the rest of the world. This is from the article. The high and rising level of U.S. government debt risk driving up borrowing costs around the world and undermining global financial stability, the International Monetary Fund has warned. Continuing from the article, don't you stop listening. Don't you dare stop listening. The IMF said Wednesday that increased government spending, growing public debt, and elevated interest rates in the United States had contributed to high and volatile yields or interest rates on treasuries, raising the risk of higher rates elsewhere. Loose fiscal policy in the United States exerts upward pressure on global interest rates and the dollar. Vitor Gaspar, director of the IMF's Fiscal Affairs Department, told reporters. It pushes up funding costs in the rest of the world, thereby exacerbating existing fragilities and risk. People can either accept the fact that the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, a group of 190 member countries, of which the U.S. is one, warned months ago, and I talked about it months ago, that the fiscal policy of the United States is driving global inflation. They can either accept that, or they can accept the campaign spokesperson for Kamala Harris that says, nah, it ain't, we're not to blame. We're not to blame. Nothing we're doing. Inflation's everywhere. The IMF does nothing but praise the United States and the economy. You go look up any of the articles. You Google IMF and U.S. debt. It was roughly around April of this year, June of this year, that there were a lot of articles coming out about the IMF and the warnings about the U.S. debt. And in every one of those articles, they praised the United States economy and how well it was doing. At the same time, they were saying, but for God's sake, can you stop spending? Can you stop spending so much? You are pushing up global inflation. You can either accept that, or you can accept the people who are lying to you to make you feel better, to take away any criticism from Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and their fiscal policy. Your choice. And it's an important choice. It's an important choice because if we're still in some sort of a Republican democracy here, then voters do have a say in how their government governs. And if we're just going to go along with the happy, joy feelings coming out of Kamala Harris and her campaign, well, then we very well could be in trouble because it's basic economic policy. If your economy is shrinking, unemployment is above targets, well, then you do expansionary spending like stimulus and tax cuts. If your economy is expanding and unemployment is low, then you do contractionary policy like spending cuts and tax increases. We have been, and Kamala Harris plans to appear to be willing to do the exact opposite of the basic economic policy. Oh, no, wait, she wants to raise taxes on the wealthy. Don't make me go through that again. Don't make me go through that again. She's talking more social spending, middle-class tax cuts that we can't afford. Maybe that's a sneaky way of her saying she's going to extend the Trump tax cuts for the middle class that expire in 2025. I don't know. But if she's talking new middle-class tax cuts, I don't know how we're going to pay for that. She's basically talking expansionary spending during a time of growth. Exactly what the nonpartisan 190-member IMF is warning is driving global inflation. Should I be concerned? Or should I just be joyful? You know what makes me joyful? You know what will make me happy? A leader that understands that sometimes truth has to override the politics. Sometimes reality and truth has to override the politics. Sometimes you just got to hit people with the bad news. You got to do it. Sometimes you got to tell them, listen, we had a party. Now it's time for the cleanup. We might go through a little short, moderate recession to correct things, where some people may temporarily experience layoffs, but don't worry, we got a safety net for that. And wages may not continue to go up as much as they've been going up, but don't worry, prices will also be able to come down if we go through a little modest recession, little recession. We'll bounce back quickly if we do it right. Sometimes you got to tell people that. You got to accept that. Sometimes reality and truth has to override the politics. That would make me joyful. Feeling like I can walk into a voting booth on November 5th confident I was voting for a leader who understood that. Not one that thinks the problem with buying a home is government assistance with a down payment. No, it's the monthly payment driven by the interest rate that's the problem. You give me $50,000 to go out and buy a house, it does me no good if I can't afford your $3,000 a month mortgage because interest rates are so high. It's not that there's not enough homes. It's the interest rate. How about a leader who's willing to stop lying about how much people pay in taxes? Give me that. Can I have that?
Are billionaires paying only 3% in taxes? That's what President Biden said during a recent speech in Maryland. Take a look.
I've also called on Congress to pass my proposal for a billionaire minimum tax. We had, when we started this administration, about 720 billionaires. Now we have about 1,000. You know what their average tax they pay is? About 3%. Look, no billionaire should pay a lower tax than a school teacher or firefighter.
There are multiple problems with what Biden said. For one, the White House told us he meant to say 8%, not 3%. And even that figure takes into account the billionaire's stock holdings, which aren't taxed until they're sold. So that's not a fair way to explain how the current federal income taxes are applied. Other groups like ProPublica have calculated more accurate estimates. They found that between 2013 and 2018, the richest 25 Americans paid an average rate of about 16%. You can see that there. Meanwhile, the Tax Foundation looked at income brackets from 2020, finding that the top 1% paid an average tax rate of about 26%. You can see that up there. So by comparison, teachers and firefighters are paying somewhere between 5 and 15%. All that to say, Biden's numbers are just off here, and that's why the Truth-O-Meter rates his claim false.
We want me to tell you. We want me to tell you. It's fact-checked a million times. I've been saying it. I told you he was going to tell that lie in the debate, and he did. It forms the entire basis of their argument. The rich don't pay enough. They need to pay more. But they're not being honest. They're not being honest. And they could very well be honest and say, look, 16% is not enough. Billionaires should pay more than 16%. But they don't, because it doesn't work. Their whole argument falls apart if it's not 3%, if it's not 8%. Their whole argument falls apart. Because if I tell you, well, wait a second, billionaires are paying 16% or 20% or 26%, well, what are you going to raise it to raise the money you need to raise to do what you want to do? So the whole argument falls apart. That's a problem. That's a cause for concern. It's fact-checked and debunked everywhere. Not conservatives, not Republicans, not anti-tax people. Everywhere that has been fact-checked and debunked. They pay more than 8%. You got to find the money somewhere else. How about the border? Should I be concerned? Another major issue. Oh, Kamala Harris, send me the border bill and I'll sign it. Send me that border bill, the toughest border bill that's been negotiated, and I'll sign it. Of course, again, they're not being truthful there. Kamala Harris said that her and Joe brought together conservatives and liberals, and they came up with this. No, that's not what they did. They didn't bring anybody together. You remember what happened? They wanted funding for Israel and Ukraine, and Republicans said, we won't give you the funding unless you do something about the border. That's how that bill got negotiated. Kamala Harris and Joe Biden didn't bring anybody together. They basically got strong-armed into coming up with a bill, but they came up with a bill, and so now she says she'll sign it. Okay, what's your plan B? What do you mean? What I mean is, what's your plan B? Well, send me the border bill, I'll sign it. No, that's plan A. That's plan A. I don't think they're going to send you the border bill so you can sign it. And I don't want you standing up at the podium like Joe Biden after a year telling reporters, I didn't know Republicans wouldn't work with me. So maybe you should come up with a plan B. I could do this all day. Honestly, I could just keep talking about this and playing proof after proof after proof of how the Democratic convention was nothing more than a waste of time. A waste of time, unless they're going to take these issues seriously and come up with serious solutions. The Republican convention was a waste of time because they're moderately crazy. They're somewhat out of their minds. And they're being led by a guy who very well might be a figment of our imaginations. Should I be concerned or should I just be joyful at the direction we're going? What's the solution? This show ain't just ranting and raving. You should know that by now. I got to offer you the solution. I got to offer you some ideas. What's the solution? First, the solution to crazy versus stupid choice, if that's what we're facing. And I think that's what we're facing, and I don't think it's going to change. So how do I decide if I'm undecided? Donald Trump is crazy, but all Republicans aren't.
What you talking about, Willis?
Now, hang on. Let's not let politics get in the way of reason. Reason tells us that the Republican Party, Republicans in Congress, want to keep their jobs above all else. If Donald Trump is going to help them keep their jobs, they'll continue to support Donald Trump. If Donald Trump is going to hurt them and make them lose their jobs, they will not support Donald Trump. So if Donald Trump becomes president and decides to really become a dictator, decides to really go off the rails, well, there are consequences for that. Maybe not for him, but for Republicans in the midterms. They very well could be voted out. Make no mistake, there are plenty of moderate Republicans who will not go as far as what some people think Donald Trump wants to go. Just become an arch criminal, dictator, running the United States into the ground. They're not going to stand for that. They will vote out Republicans who are going along with that agenda. And so there are guardrails. No matter what you want to think or what people want to tell you, there are guardrails for Donald Trump to face if he becomes president. So all this talk about the end of democracy if Donald Trump gets reelected, it's a little overblown. Unless you really think there's going to be a civil war or a military coup if Trump is elected, there'll be midterms and there'll be a reckoning for whatever is done between the election and the midterms. So that tempers my fears of crazy just a bit. Just a bit. Now, on the Democratic side, their policies are not very well thought out or even realistic. But I think they're well-intentioned. I do. I think they mean well. So we just have to filter out the stupid and the crazy. And we have to make a decision, not on one person or two people, but on what an administration would look like. What the people the administration would be made up of. And what will be best for the country under the worst of circumstances, not the best of circumstances. Like I say, I go out to bid a job. I don't bid the job based on the best of circumstances. I bid the job based on the worst of circumstances. So I make sure I don't underbid myself. That's how we have to look at this. We have to look at the person we want to be in office under the worst of circumstances. If North Korea decides to go into South Korea, simultaneously China decides to go into Taiwan, simultaneously Russia decides to expand its war in the Ukraine, how are we going to respond to that? What leader is going to respond to that? What administration will be in a better position to respond to that? Those are the things we got to ask ourselves and think about to make a decision on the stupid versus crazy. Now, my solution, my advice for the Democrats? Well, they're kind of starting to figure it out. I do like Kamala talking more about unity and bringing the country together and being a president for all people. I mean, there's been so much damage done to that feeling. It's going to be tough, but you got to start somewhere. So the rhetoric absolutely has to change, not just on one side, on both sides. The rhetoric has to change. As I said, you got to move past that whole January 6th thing. You just have to. You got to move past that whole election denier thing. The rhetoric has to change, and then Democrats have to ask the question, once again, sorry, I just want to make sure people understand, I've been trying. They have to start to ask the question I've been screaming at them to ask for 3 years. Not, how can these people be so stupid to vote for Donald Trump, but instead ask, what is so bad about us that they wouldn't vote for us? That's the question. Not why are they voting for Donald Trump? Why are they not voting for us? What is it that they see is so bad about us that they won't vote for us? That's the question Democrats have to start asking themselves and asking the people out there in an honest and respectful way. And here's one of the answers you just might get. Listen to this.
People they at least don't want to be told that they need government involved in their lives. Even some Democrats, check this out. Men can be mercenary. There's an evil in the world that'll never be purged. Your only goal as a governing system in the government you're thankfully now a part of is to control the latent evil that exists in men. Your goal is not to make my life better. Your goal is to get the out of my way and let me make my own life better. You don't know shit about me. You don't know anything about my business. You don't know anything about my health condition, about the educational goals I have for my kid. Get out of my way. Give me police services, give me a decent, strong military, a court system, and please, God, I don't use the name as vain, get the out of my way. I don't want you to do shit for me. Shut the up and go there and do nothing. Am I allowed to curse on your show?
My man Dan Bongino. I hate to say it. I hate to call him my man. I hate him because he makes me like him sometimes. And I find him distasteful at times and even dishonest in a media personality sort of a way. You know, a lot of dishonesty in the media. It gets excused. But I listen and I respect his blatant honesty. Does that sound like a guy who's being phony about his position on the government, on how much involvement he thinks the government should have in your life? Does he sound like he's being phony? No, he's being blatantly honest. And I was bleeping that, by the way. That wasn't bleeped originally. I bleep it out for my show. But he even says people don't want to be told. At least they don't want to be told the government is going to help them or they need the government to help them. How many times have I said that? If you give me two choices, if I'm some independent, rugged individualist out there in the country and you say, you know, I give you this choice, this person running who says, I'm going to do this for you and that for you and, you know, you can't succeed without me. I'm going to send your kids to school and I'm going to give you money for this and money for that. There are people, they don't like that. They don't. I know that's very hard for some people to believe, but there are people, they don't like that. They want to be told, you can do it. You can do it. You don't need us. You don't need our help. We're just going to stay out of your way. We're going to keep the playing field level. And you go out and you make your own way and you make your own success. That's what they want to be told. Now, policy, look, they'll take what you give them. If it's reasonable and fair and makes sense, they're not going to turn it down. But it's just a difference of opinion in the way people look at how much and what government should be doing. And Democrats, you got to understand that. You got to start to understand that. What Democrats think is, no, you're wrong. People love us. People want our help. All our ideas poll well. And like I said, people will take the help, and then 9 times out of 10, everything turns to doo-doo. Everything. Every time the government intervenes, it turns to doo-doo, one way or the other. And it could very well be, well, yeah, you helped me. I took 2 steps forward, but then I took 2 steps back. I'm right where I started. Or, worst case scenario, I took 2 steps forward and 3 steps back because of your intervention. That's what tends to happen more times than not. And so who are people going to blame? Not themselves. Certainly not themselves. They blame the government. And what's the government say? I guess we must need to spend more money. I guess this program ain't working because we didn't spend enough. It doesn't work. It very rarely works, the government intervention. Just leave things alone. Let the market figure it out. That's the answer. That's the answer for Democratic policy. It's very simple. People won't accept it, but it's very simple. The answer is somewhere between leave me the F alone and what Alexandria, I hate anyone with over $20 in their pockets, Ocasio-Cortez wants. I mean, the hate. Listen to this.
Because we know that Donald Trump would sell this country for $1 if it meant lining his own pockets and greasing the palms of his Wall Street friends. And I, for one, am tired of hearing about how a 2-bit union buster thinks of himself as more of a patriot than the woman who fights every single day to lift working people out from under the boots of greed, trampling on our way of life.
Holy smokes. Did some billionaire snatch a lollipop out of her mouth when she was a baby? Did someone she loves get run over by a Tesla? Where does that level of anger and hatred come from? for a whole segment of the population. I mean, Kamala Harris is raising millions from Wall Street. Millions. So I don't know. Somewhere in between that, somewhere between F off government and whatever Alexandria bootleg Disney princess Ocasio-Cortez wants, somewhere in between that is the sweet spot for Democrats and Democratic policy. If Pamela Harrison could figure that out, she'd win 50 states.
It's Kamala. Kamala. It's Kamala.
Sorry, Kamala. Thanks for listening. That's the show. Hope you enjoyed it. The Comparison Guy Podcast. Listen on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, anywhere you get podcasts. Please go and subscribe. Please, pretty please. Pretty please. Subscribe, follow, rate, share. I would appreciate it. It would help me out. Don't forget, keep an eye out for an episode within the next couple of days of me yelling at my father. Oh, and don't forget YouTube. The show is also on YouTube, full episodes now. I know, it's just a static image, not video, but mainly YouTube I want to use for comments right now. So please, leave comments. Tell me what you think. Tell me if you agree. Tell me if you disagree. Please. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time.